Now, next up in our list of queries that we're going to go tackle out of the first responder kit is SP BlitzIndex. Now, SP BlitzIndex, it's also prioritized, but it's a little bit different. So let's go run SP BlitzIndex. Now with SP BlitzIndex, the one parameter that almost everybody starts with is get all databases equals 1. And this can be slow depending on how many databases you have. If you have like 50 or more, we require you to run it with a parameter called bring the pane equals 1. And one of the things you're going to ask is, how much of an overhead does this have on other currently running queries? And it doesn't like block other people, but it is CPU intensive because it's having to go through each of the databases one at a time and run SP BlitzIndex. This isn't something that's designed to be run very often, but I run it in production all the time because production is the only place that you can get valid index usage data out of. Just like all the other diagnostic stuff that SQL Server has, all of the data that you want here is based on the index usage in memory. SQL Server doesn't write any of this to disk. And frankly, even some of the stuff in RAM is unreliable. And I show you which columns are not really reliable inside of mastering index tuning. When I start with get all databases equals 1, it gives me a prioritized list. But you see how these have like kind of psychology names to them? There's one says aggressive indexing, one says indexophobia, some say multiple personalities or forgetful or self-loathing. When Kendra Little was originally writing this proc was originally written by Microsoft Certified Master Kendra Little. She goes, okay, I've got this prioritized thing here, but I'm having trouble. How do I explain to people that your database has like certain attributes, but they may not be wrong? And I said, well, it's a lot like people's psychology. All of us have a few little bit of a weird thing, behaviors going on. Maybe we collect a few too many things. Maybe we're a kleptomaniac. Maybe we're agoraphobic. We don't really like people, but it's in small doses. We like going to furry websites or whatever it is. But it becomes a problem when it really like takes over your life. When you are the cat person who has 42 cats, when you can't make your way through your apartment because there's so many hoarded old newspapers. That's exactly what SQL Server indexing is like. All of us have a little bit of freaky behavior inside our databases. The problem arises when we see an overwhelming amount of freaky behavior. So what I'm doing when I'm looking at this, I'm just trying to get a quick idea of, is there something really freaky going on inside this database or inside specific databases or specific tables? So I kind of just glance down at the list from a high level, and I'll tell you that right away I can see a problem inside this database. We have just never met the tender loving care of Mr. Index here. SQL Server is desperately asking for all kinds of missing indexes. In this case, it looks like there's one that's just desperately needed on the votes table and a few on the post table. And from a high level, I'm just kind of scanning to see how bad things are. I'll also scroll across to the side, and there's this. This tells me how many indexes the tables already have. Generally speaking, when I'm taking over someone's server, it's in one of two extremes. Either it's never met the, Don says, final clarification on query store. Correct. Yep, that's absolutely correct. But watch Erin Stellato's course, and she goes into more details on it. Either the database has never met the tender loving care of Mr. Index, and all of the tables are like what I show on here, where 0 non-clustered indexes exist, or it's the other extreme where everybody's best friend's first name basis. Dan says, what should we get without bring the pane? Exactly the same as this. The only reason I showed bring the pane was just because if you have more than 50 databases, you're going to be required to run it, but you totally don't have to run it. So either they have no indexes whatsoever, or they have dozens of indexes on every table, like they've been running the index tuning advisor all over the time. The database tuning wizard has generated all kinds of stuff. It's generally one of those two extremes. And it's not necessarily that way across the whole entire server. Sometimes it's extremes on each table. Like everybody thinks that the customer's table needs lots of indexes, so they put in so many and they didn't understand the overhead and impact. Okay, Dan, I'm not ready to troubleshoot yours though. First, I'm going to explain what I'm seeing on here, then we'll run it on yours. And I'll talk about some gotchas inside with them. So I'm trying to get a really high level of what's going on inside the server. And also, Dan, I should explain, it also has to be production. It can't be a development type server. So when I look at this from a really high level, the consultant in me says, on this particular server, the problem is that we have a whole lot of tables that need indexes, and we haven't added any yet. There are a lot of tables with no indexes existing on them. Now, depending on what your production server is, you're going to see dramatically different results. We'll talk about those when we get to yours. For mine, for my write-up, here's the way that I would probably write it up. Now, I would have up here on the SP Blitz cache, I would have continued for the top 3, 4, 5 queries. Now for SP BlitzIndex, things that I'm going to say is, in the Stack Overflow database, lots of missing index recommendations and tables have no indexes whatsoever. It appears that there's some aggressive index warnings, and then I'm going to go look in on that. It looks like there's this badges table where there's been some blocking going on. So I'll say the badges table may have a lot of blocking. So that's probably the part where I would start and review. When I run it overall, just getting my high-level view, I don't take action at the high-level view. I'm just trying to get a sense for overall what I'm going to have to do. Then I start zooming in more closely. For example, let's take this votes table, and you see how it has a high-value missing index. That estimated benefit number is basically a combination of these three things. The query that generated that missing index request ran 1,248 times. The query would have been 100% faster, and the query cost is 661 query bucks, like we talk about in How to Think Like the Engine. Well, remember, like I talked about yesterday in Fundamentals of Query Tuning, this comes straight from the mouth of Clippy. Hey, buddy, looks like you're querying the votes table. Sure would help if I had an index on these columns. Clippy is making up the impact number. SQL Server is making up the average query cost. As we talk about in How to Think Like the Engine, it's not necessarily correct. So you've got to take these with a grain of salt that, yes, this has an estimated benefit of 217 million, and people want to know what that estimated benefit is. It's just a combination of Clippy and the engine getting together to make a rough idea of what's going to happen inside when you create this index. However, I will say that you probably might remember, we've established that y'all are the old audience, you might remember there was a supermodel back in the late 1970s, or in the 1970s, Linda Evangelista. And Linda had a quote where she says, "I don't get out of bed for less than $10,000 a day." Well, I don't really look at missing indexes unless they have a benefit of at least 1 million benefit points per day. There are times when I'll look when they're even lower. Just most of the time when I saddle up to a stranger SQL server, I'm looking for at least 1 million points per day. Here, they all have 1 million points a day and up. So I have a lot of indexing that I may want to consider doing. That first one, the votes table of 217 million, it's a big deal. I should probably go take a look at that. L. Fox said, "Did you borrow MS Canon to create your parameter list for my SP Blitz stored procs?" No, we, as you can tell by some of them, like Bring the Pain, we tend to go about the opposite of what Microsoft would do. We tend to have a little fun with ours. So I don't make decisions at this high of a level. I don't make decisions when I'm looking out at the overall server. What I do is I scroll across to the right, and there's this. there's a more info command that will let me zoom in at the table level. And I'm going to take just a second to point out that like all of our scripts, every one of the warnings comes in with a URL where you can go learn for more details, like when there's a warning that you haven't seen before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go zoom in on the posts table. I'm going to copy that out. And because SP BlitzIndex can take some time in order to run when I do it for get all databases, when I go to zoom in for more info, I go and copy this into a new query window and run it over here. Now, when I run it at the table level, it gives me the first result set is the list of indexes that already exist. So this table has a clustered index. It's the primary key, CXPK, means it's the clustered index, it's the primary key. And the one key on that index is the ID column. What is the ID column? You can scroll down here and you can go see. Here, the third result set has the entire data types and columns on all the table. So you can see that, yes, it's an identity column, it's an integer. Then you can see if you're trying to decide whether or not you should index some of these columns, you can see their data types down here and make the decision as to whether or not you would want to include it. You might also notice too, so the second set is the indexes that SQL Server wishes it would have had. You might notice that there might be more in here sometimes because we do less filtering inside here. So here what we're saying is, we're saying SQL Server's ask, or specifically Clippy, is asking for an index on post ID and user ID. He's also asking for an index on post ID is deleted and is private. He's also asking for an index on user ID that includes post ID. He's asking for this index down here as well. It's up to you to get down to closer to what we call the 5 and 5 rule. I aim for, or guideline, I aim for around 5 indexes per table or less and around 5 columns or less per index. I talk about how to get there in the fundamentals of index tuning and mastering index tuning classes, but I'm going to aim for around 5 indexes or less and around 5 columns or less per index. I'm going to use these indexes here, or the suggestions here, in order to start coming up with the indexes that I want to design. Jonathan says, for the high-value missing indexes that it recommends with a ton of include columns, should I just index the equality and inequality fields and ignore the rest? Very often, Clippy will recommend a whole boatload of includes. Jonathan, I'm with you. I will index the equality and inequality columns and leave off the includes. I'll make SQL Server go do key lookups in order to get the includes when I'm talking about the 5 and 5 guideline. Like if he came up with 5 equality and inequality columns, I'll make him go do key lookups in order to get the rest. I will also make him go do key lookups if he's asking for varchar max and varchar max, etc. releases or columns. Eamon says, why don't I have the stats results set? I am in the latest release. You're in the latest release of SP BlitzIndex, but you're not in the latest release of SQL Server. If I remember right, you're on 2014, I think it was. So that, it requires a DMV that didn't get introduced until SQL Server 2016. And it might have even been newer than that. It might have been 2017 when that came out. But yeah, anyway. Okay, so this is kind of the console that I use when I'm going to go create indexes for the votes table. Chandra says, last time I watched your video and tried to explain the same about 25 includes at my previous workplace, they almost fired me. I'm glad I'm not working there anymore. People seem to think, especially managers, seem to think includes are free. They're like, oh, includes don't cost anything. They're magically delicious. Super easy. And then I have to do the little demo with them about how to think like the engine and explain what an extra included column is and how it's the same as a key when it comes to space on the page and all that. I've had to do this presentation so many times in my life, the how to think like the engine, that now these days when I travel, I actually travel with sample engine pages, because so often a manager will try to say stuff like that, and I have to get the pieces of paper out. We do the little discussion, and then they come over and, oh my God, I had no idea. Whoa, did you all know that? I didn't. Wow. And it always seems to be someone who went to a training class 20 years ago, taught by a certified instructor who'd never actually looked at internals. I'm like, oh, okay. Good on you. Good luck. See, I don't just have my own company coffee cups. I have other people's coffee cups too. So that is a Lufticult, also Luft. Dimitri says, thanks for explaining about missing stats. I've almost broke my head trying to understand why it was on different machines. You know, the other thing that'll trigger it too, just while I'm saying it, is you have to be running SP BlitzIndex from the database with the object. So for example, right now you see how it says nothing inside there? Watch what happens when I switch over into the database and I execute it again. Now I'm going to get the stats down there. And I don't know that this is written up anywhere in terms of the documentation, but you have to be in the database itself because we're hitting the DMV with the stats in it. And you have to be, if I remember right, either in that database or we have to rig up a cross database query, and we just didn't want to do that. Joe says, do you have recommendations for removing indexes with 0 reads and 30 million writes that are labeled with specific uses? When you say labeled with specific uses, what I think you mean is some developer says the index has to be there or else the application won't work. What I like doing is disabling the index. So you can run an alter index disable, and that just frees up the space and stops doing writes for that index. The index still looks like it's there to anyone who's going through Object Explorer. It's just that the index doesn't actually exist. SQL Server will automatically use other indexes instead if someone does want to write a query that would have used it. But if they write a query that has an index hint in it, their query will fail if the index is disabled. So just make sure that they didn't use an index hint. I really wish that SQL Server would just automatically ignore the index hint and work around it. And I've been meaning to write a request for that in SQL Server, and I'm just going to write it down just so that I don't forget, because I've been meaning to do this forever. Ignore index hints feedback, and then go do that. Okay. So this is really the console where I go and do my index work. And I'm going to close the boats one because I'm going to demo it the way that I do my console kind of work with the post table, because this one's clearly a hot mess. Jonathan says, I have a few indexes with multiple personalities, borderline duplicate keys. Is it worth it to go consolidate these indexes into one, even if they all have a relatively high reads to writes ratio? Oh, it's a great question. So for me, it depends on how many indexes are on the table. Am I already at the 5 and 5 point, or am I at maybe the 50 indexes point? Do I have like 10, 20, 30 indexes on the table? If I have 10, 20, 30 indexes on the table and people want to add more, that's when I would start deduping. But if the indexes are getting used and no one's complaining about that table, I would leave them there. If they're complaining about the table, they're generally complaining about one of two things. They want to add more indexes, in which case I'm going to have to go dedupe some. Or they're having blocking problems. People are trying to do inserts, updates, and deletes, and they can't because we have to update all the different copies of all these different indexes. If you're having blocking due to a high number of indexes, that's when I will go through and start deduping them. But otherwise, if they're not bothering anybody, if no one's complaining about that table, that's fine, and it's not having blocking issues. Eamon says, so do you recommend disabling them for a while before dropping? I don't, and you'll see why as I script out the way that I work with it. I'm going to go work on the post table because we have a whole bunch of indexes that SQL Server is wishing for over on the post table. So I'm going to go copy paste this out. And then I'm going to run it in a new window. I'm going to say, go show me what you know about the post table. SQL Server says, okay, there aren't any indexes on the post table other than the clustered index. And Clippy's piping up here going, hey, buddy. Oh, I got an idea. Oh, I got lots of ideas. Oh, no, trust me, these are good. These are the good ones. I've been holding them out just for this webcast. So here he wants all these different indexes. And if you look in real life, I'll usually look at the estimated impact, mostly because I'm looking at the number of uses they would have had. Are these queries that only read once or twice, or are these queries that run all the doggone time? Let's say, just to pick a big stack, let's say that all of these run all the doggone time. I'm going to highlight them all, copy. I'm going to hide this, and then paste it all into here. Now I have this hot mess that I'm going to go try to work through. And the big thing to remember in here, everybody thinks that the keys have to be in this order, that community owned date has to go first, post type ID has to go second. That's not what it means at all. These are a comma delimited list of columns that SQL Server wants you to consider indexing. To prove it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a query that generates this index recommendation. I just hit enter on it so that it could wrap around on one screen. Let's go write the query. Select creation date, view count from DBO posts, where community owned date equals get date. Now, of course, is that necessarily the exact right query? No, I'm just putting in something to simulate what SQL Server's thinking while it works through this. And post type ID equals 1, and is deleted equals 0, and is private equals 0, and owner user ID is anything other than 26837. These four are the equality columns. This one is the inequality search, and these are the two includes. Drum roll, please. 10, 9, 8. I don't really have a drum roll. But let's go highlight that query, and let's go pop into the Stack Overflow database. And then let's say query, go display the estimated execution plan. Clippy, show me what kind of index that you would want to create for this query, and look at what we have here. Let's go script it out so that we can see it. Right click in here and we'll say missing index details, and presto. Here's the exact index that Clippy was recommending. And if you go into the execution plan, if I say show me the execution plan XML, you'll even see the equality parts and inequality parts. This is exactly the kind of query that triggered that missing index request. Now, drum roll. If all of these columns are equality searches, does it matter which one goes first? And for those of you who watched Fundamentals of Index Tuning 2 days ago, you'll know that it doesn't matter which one goes first. These are just a comma delimited list of columns to include or to put in the key. So when I'm looking at all of these down here, I'm really looking more at what they have in common, not necessarily what needs to go first. Joe says, is it considered equality if the type is a bit and your where clause is column anything other than 1? Yes, because of course null would be an alternative value as well. Good, neat question though. All right, so now knowing that, now that you know a little bit more about how Clippy generates these missing index recommendations, when you're looking at this wall of index recommendations, when I'm looking at this wall of index recommendations, what I'm looking to do is to put them together into groups that I might be able to satisfy with just one index creation instead of multiples. So I'm going to go kind of scan through here. It looks like, so these three right here have all owner user ID in them. These two do as well. So I'm going to cut these two and I'm going to paste them up higher so that I can organize them next to each other just to kind of make my job a little easier. There's another one way up here that also has owner user ID. I'm going to cut him. I'm going to cut him. Come down here. Looks like I got three down here that all have post type ID in them. Now notice though, So do these. Well, 4 of the 6. So I could put these in either group. This is where you get to start being creative and you try to figure out what are the minimum number of indexes that I can create in order to satisfy as many queries as possible. What you're going to ask is, so Brent, can you tell me which queries created all of these missing index requests? Not yet. SQL Server 2019 introduced a new column in a DMV that looks like we may be able to get there. None of us have started playing around with it yet, though. For right now, in 2017 and prior, we don't have an easy way to join from these missing index recommendations over to the plan cache because +2, remember, your plan cache could disappear at any given time, or parts of it can. So what I do is I use my half-hour hourglass here to make as much progress as I can inside the span of half an hour to just go through here with a machete and rip through and tackle as many missing index recommendations as I can. Deep breath. Let's do it. So I got the one on owner user ID. I'm going to take this one on owner user ID, move him down. I've got this one's also on post type ID. I'll put him up here with this one, copy this down, paste this down. So now it looks like between these this set right up here, I could create index. Owner user ID, post type ID is deleted, is private, private. On DBO posts, owner user ID, post type ID is deleted, is private. And that is likely going to satisfy all of the indexes right up in that group between lines 10 and 16. Now, I didn't put any includes on there because when I'm going through with a machete trying to fix as fast as I can, I'll be like, I got this 5 and 5 rule or guideline in mind. I probably don't want to go out and include all kinds of other things like body, which might be a big giant column. Looking up here above, equality on is deleted and is private. Create index is deleted, is private, and at first you'd be tempted to just create an index on that to cover these two, but remember, these are a comma delimited list. It doesn't matter what order they go on. I could take this index right above it that is on is deleted, is private, and parent ID, and I can throw parent ID in here as well. On DBO posts is deleted, is private, and parent ID. And then I could even throw in includes if I want. Now I said that I'm going to go through here with a machete as quickly as possible. And you can kind of guess that if I'm ripping through here inside the span of 30 minutes, it's going to be hard to come up with a good full set of index recommendations. So you've got to make a choice when you're using the first responder kit scripts. Do I actually want to produce deliverables, as in like specific index creations that are going to be made, or do I want to, over on my markdown file, say, I recommend spending about a day working on indexes in the posts and votes tables, or do you want to go start flipping the hourglass to start working through them? I'm not going to cover the process of how exactly I do index design, of course, inside this class. The point on this one is to show you how I use, coming back over here, I start with get all databases equals 1. Then, as I'm looking at this high overall psychology type thing, then I'm starting to drill in and analyze indexes on one table at a time. What I do is I go copy paste out the stuff from the table name level detail and then go run that in another window. And I'm going to show you there are more parameters that I need to show you on BlitzIndex. I'm just going to stop for a second to hit a couple of questions. So coming over here. LFox says, I have a heap table with 6 indexes. Any general recommendations? So this is one of those where I'm going to point you towards the URL. So what you probably have inside of the warnings in SP BlitzIndex is there's probably a warning about having an active heap. Go copy paste that URL into your browser and you can learn more about the kinds of things you need to do to fix that. Jerry says, are there any benefits to running SP BlitzIndex for tables that have a column store? This is tricky. So with column store indexes, sometimes they have additional indexes on top of them in the form of row store indexes. Sometimes they need additional indexes on top of them. The problem is the diagnostic tools built in for column store indexes aren't really good right now. So what I would do instead is I would go hit Nico Neugebauer CISL. Nico has this column store index library that will help you figure out what you want to do with column store indexes, like what maintenance tasks you need to do, whether or not they need additional row store indexes, and so forth. SP BlitzIndex really focuses on row store tables, but it doesn't touch as much spatial, column store, XML, full text, all that kind of thing. But good question. Dimitri said, said they introduced something you didn't play with yet regarding missing index recommendations. How is it called to read about it? So that is, let me go pull and see, I can get auto complete to do. Select star from sysdmdb missing index group. I believe it's out of here. Nope, it's not that. Missing index group stats query. Yep, I think it's going to be involved in here. I think it's this plus group handle, select star from sys dmdb missing. Rather than me like watch Brent guess DMV query contents, go hit books online for sys dmdb missing index whatever, and you can go see what was introduced now in 2019. But like I said, like I haven't had any chance to play with it yet. It's one of those where I don't have a lot of clients on 2019, so I haven't had to do too much real-time diagnostics. Hadley says, I'm seeing this, aggressive over-indexing. My indexes are over the 5 and 5, but the T-SQL suggests a create index. This is why I said for aggressive indexes, you have to read the more info link, because this is really big and complicated. But I'm going to show you why, because the classic problem that people run into. See how mine says aggressive indexing? And if I scroll across to the right, it says create T-SQL. The create T-SQL is only the SQL that you could use to create this object. We are not saying that you should run it. It's just here's the T-SQL involved with this line. That's all we're saying. We're not saying that you should go run this alter table, anything like that. For this one, what you really have to do is go analyze the indexes on that table to figure out whether you need to drop indexes, add indexes, or so forth. The create index or alter table there is just saying, here's the index that has blocking problems happen on it. Sam says, you mentioned that you could choose any equality field in order. If you had some queries that use one particular field, like is deleted, wouldn't you want that one first? Yes, absolutely. If so, would that be displayed in the BlitzIndex results, giving you the knowledge that it is a standalone missing index? Yes. And actually, you just saw that, but I ran kind of fast. So let me go through it a little slower. So that is on the post table. So I was looking at the indexes on the post table, and I copied out all of the missing index recommendations. Copy. And then I pasted them here. So this is my list of index recommendations. And you said, are there like fields that are used by themselves and you might want to have them go first? Well, take a look at lines 10 and 11. Well, I'll move them aside so they're all by themselves. So see how both of these are used, is deleted and is private? And then there are other indexes that also have is deleted and is private. What I did was I took one of these, parent ID, for example, and I grouped it in with the others. And then I created an index, create index is deleted, is private, parent ID, because I wanted to say on DBO posts is deleted, is private, then parent ID. Since it doesn't matter which order they go in, even though the top one says parent ID first, it doesn't mean that he has to actually go first. He can go in any order that we want him to. as long as they're inequality columns. Things start to get a little messy when we talk about the difference between equality and inequality, and I talk about that in the fundamentals of index tuning class. It says, I get it now, thanks. Seriously though, like this one lesson that we just stepped through about how, and we kind of just hit it like a glancing blow. This one lesson is something that most full-time DBAs don't learn until like 15, 20 years in. They're all like, wait a minute, it doesn't matter what order the most selective has to go first. I read about that on Bingopedia, because people just don't get how the thing works underneath the covers. All right. So you saw me run it at the entire server level, then you saw me zoom into specific indexes. But there's another parameter that's super useful for this, which is mode. Now, by default, mode equals 0 is exactly what you just saw. This says, go run diagnostics across all of the databases on the server and give me the psychologist recommendations. So I'm going to give out the little decoder ring here for the different modes. Mode 0 equals overall diagnostics. 1 equals summary. 2 equals inventory for copy paste into Excel. 3 equals missing indexes only. 4 equals overall diagnostics. Diagnostics, but with more details. That's the way I'll say it. Now, all this is documented. All this is in the documentation around the mode switch, but because I use this so much, SP BlitzIndex has all kinds of other parameters too as well, but because I use this one so much, I want to demo each one of them. Mode equals 1, I don't ever use. I know it's in there, and I just said it's there, but I'm just going to kind of mention it just because it's there. What this gives you is a database by database grouping of the number of indexes in it, how much space the indexes take up, and so forth. Long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I used to run this at the beginning of my index tuning projects, and I would run it again at the end. Because what I could say, I don't know why, managers are so obsessed with the cost of storage. Managers are always like, Flash is $10,000 a terabyte. You people got to stop thinking that disk is cheap. And I'm like, okay, whatever. SQL Server licensing is $7,000 a core. Come on, deal with it. But so because managers were so obsessed with, what like a terabyte of spaces cost, I would run it with mode equals 1, and I would say, see, here at the beginning of our project, we had 5.8 gigs of RAM. After I got through and I reduced a lot of dead weight, and then I added the right indexes, see, we're at 4 gigabytes worth of space, so I saved you like 2 gigs. These days, I don't even bother with that. If you need to for your teams, you're welcome to. I just don't ever have to do that. Mode 2, I use every frickin' day. This gives me all of my index details in something that I can copy paste into a spreadsheet so I can understand exactly what indexes I have. This gives me, for every database, for every table, all the indexes that I have, the kind of table or index that it is, what columns it's on, coming further across, has things like your includes, whether or not it's an index view, whether or not it's column store, when it was used, like when were the last dates and times that this thing was read or written to, how many reads and writes it has. If I had a time machine, if I could go back like 10 years or whenever it was that we first originally wrote this script, instead of calling it total reads and user updates, I would have just called it reads and writes because it's a little easier to understand. But total reads is the number of times that queries read data from this index, meaning that the index was used in order to make a query go faster. User updates, aka writes, is the number of times that this index made a query go slower because SQL Server has to keep the indexes in sync with the base table. In a perfect world, I wouldn't have any objects that I do a lot of writes to and I never read from, so this helps me gauge that. Long time ago, like years ago, I would try to come up with a reads per write ratio. I don't screw around with that now. I'm more interested in just aiming for around, say, the 5 and 5 guideline. If you scan across, there are a lot of other interesting stuff inside here as well, like the size and space that it takes up. One of my favorite tricks to do with a client is I'll go copy paste this entire grid out into Excel, because you would think with as much as SQL Server costs that you and I would be able to click on some of these headers and sort them in ascending or descending order. Evidently, that's too hard. So instead, what I have to do is copy paste this out and dump it into Excel. And I'll say SP BlitzIndex mode 2. Whoops, forgot to put the 2 on there. And then I'll paste it in here. Now, I also love, Excel is just so magical. The whole deal with inserting a table, just being able to click insert table, and then I magically get all this awesome, fantastic formatting. It's just utterly beautiful. So now I can scroll across, and what I like to do, let me freeze my panes first. So I'm going to say Window, View, Freeze Panes. And now I'm going to scroll across over here to my row count columns. So here is rows. Now I can sort from largest to smallest, and I can say, hey, why do we have so many rows in this table? Why is it that we've got 150 billion rows in the votes table? Are we aware of that? Over and over again, when I sort by rows, especially when I run it with get all databases equals 1 and I pull all the stuff into a single database, over and over again, when I run this and I show it to clients, continuously people say, oh, that's an archive table. It's not supposed to have any stuff in it. We're only supposed to keep 30 days worth of data in that table. This happens all the time, especially backup tables. People will make a copy of a table, they'll dump a fact table into something temporary, and they'll forget that it exists. Or they'll have these big, giant indexes that never get queried, and they're taking up tons of space. So I'll also sort by reserved megabytes descending so that they can see what the largest objects inside their database are. It's another one that's just utterly priceless when you start talking to development teams about, wouldn't it be cool if I could do your backups and restores twice as fast? Wouldn't it be cool if we didn't have to worry about so many queries fighting over what limited RAM we have? Incredibly useful. I use this all the time, mode 2. If I scroll further across, there are some gems in here too as well. There's how much time we've spent waiting for locks. And also, if I go further across, there's page I/O latch wait times. How long have I'm getting ready to sneeze. I thought I could mute it in time, but it didn't quite work. There's also page I/O latch wait times, which means which objects have we waited the longest waiting for reads to come back on, things that we're actually waiting for storage on. It's amazing that this stuff is even tracked. All of that is available to you through mode 2. So I constantly copy paste that into Excel, because also sometimes we'll say, oh, when was the last time that table got used? I can tell you. I can give you a pretty good idea out of there. Mode equals 3, what this is really good for is when you're a consultant and you need to have someone send you their information inside the database so that you can do index tuning when you're disconnected. Mode 3 dumps out all of the missing indexes in one spreadsheet. So now I can copy paste this out to find out what indexes SQL Server wishes it would have had. So I can add this over here, SP BlitzIndex, mode 3. Can paste it over here. And now when I'm doing my tuning disconnected, I can start to figure out, oh, you want an index, you say, on these equality columns. Let me go hop over to mode 2's tab and see which indexes we already have so that I can figure out which ones I want to go add. Armed with the content of this, I don't even need access to their system in order to do index tuning, because I can tell you which indexes SQL Server isn't using, which ones it's just writing to, and which ones it wishes it would have had. Just armed with that, sitting on an airplane, I can often do a huge index tuning job for a client, totally disconnected just with that. Jerry asks a good question. How far back does mode 2 go? If the number of reads and number of updates is 0, is it safe to delete the index? Oh, it depends on the version and build number of SQL Server. So there are 2 columns inside here, and I'm going to run it as SPBlitz, pop into over here and here, SPBlitzIndex, table name equals votes. So there are 2 columns inside of SPBlitzIndex, usage statistics and operational statistics. So usage statistics, just to type this out, usage stats equals sys dm db index usage stats, I think. Let's actually take that out of comments. Select star from sys dm db index usage stats. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so this is execution plans, stays till reboot. Operational stats equals sys dm db index operational stats equals touchy-feely, disappears. So the problem is operational stats is way more accurate. It measures how many times the index was actually touched. Unfortunately, it disappears at any time. There's no tracking of when the last time it was reset, and it can be reset for specific indexes. So this one's very accurate, but it just disappears. The one right above it is inaccurate. It measures the number of times that an execution plan was run that had that index somewhere in the plan, but it doesn't tell you whether it got used or not. Now, this one stays through till reboot, with the exception of some older versions of 2012 and 2014, but as long as you're on current patch levels, you're fine. This one's much less accurate, but it sticks around. So here's my general rule of thumb. If both of these say 0, then you're fine. The index isn't getting used. But if one of them holds data and not the other, then it starts to become a much tougher call, and I would leave it alone for a while. All right, so there's that one. Now I hit mode 3. I'm going to show you mode 0 again. So this is mode 0, which is the default. Now, mode 0 is the default overall headline news type thing. Mode number 4, let me go back to that, is the headline news, but it shows more rules. It shows more warnings about things that you may not be able to fix very easily. I'm going to scroll down to show you an example. So for example, I don't have any in here. It's not so bad. For example, it'll show you things like if you have a very wide table, if you have tables that accept all nulls, like every single column accepts a null. What mode 4 is really more like is Lewis Davidson's relational data modeling book. It's almost like someone went through that book and said, here are all the rules that you're kind of sort of violating, that you should think about your design patterns differently. Me and my wacko consultant role, it's very rare that I get to tell someone, you should redesign that table. I don't get that kind of luxury. It's rare that I can even tell someone to drop a column or add a column. So, but for those of you who are at the same company for an extended period of time, because we have some developers in here, mode 4 will give you advice on your table design as well. Matt says, Lewis. Oh, Matt's from Nashville. That's right. Lewis is, just to say, because you're in Nashville, Matt is, I don't know you, buddy, but Lewis is one of the funniest people that I've ever met, as well as one of the smartest, but his sense of humor just kind of slides below the radar. You got to be paying attention to catch it. He's so smart, but whew. All right, so there's SPBlitzIndex. Let me look at my notes and make sure I didn't miss anything out of my parameters that I want to hit there. Nope, that's perfect. If you do want to save this one to disk, the only one that works saving to table is mode 2. So mode 2 is the one that I copy paste into Excel. So I've also implemented the drop it into a table. So you can say output database name and all that, and it'll dump these contents into a table. I don't ever use it. But I know from out there in the field that some people are like, I would really like to save my index statistics for 6 months. I want to go back through time and see which indexes are getting used and which ones aren't. I don't ever do that. Let me tell you why. Your code changes. Your code changes every month, 2 months, 3 months. People use different things in the application. Your execution plans change. You apply service packs, cumulative updates. SQL Server makes different plan decisions. And the index data that was relevant 6 months ago has nothing to do with today. Frankly, I don't even use it from a month ago. I really like having a SQL Server up and patched like every 60 days, because if it's patched every 60 days, I can look in the DMVs and I know that the data that's inside there is fairly current. But for those of you who want to be hoarders, you're welcome to use the output databases list. Now, it's time for you to run it on your own systems. Now, when you run it on your own systems, what you're going to do is just the basic advice. You can either run it for get all databases equals 1 and mode 0, or if you just run it with SP BlitzIndex by itself, it does the same thing, but it just only does it for the database that you're in. Now is your time to go through and run it and ask questions about the stuff that you're seeing, but specifically don't just say, what does this warning mean? Because that is what the URLs are for over on the right-hand side. But if there's a question that you've been stumped about with SP BlitzIndex where you read the warning over on the right-hand side and you still don't understand what it means, now's your time to get in questions and ask on that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bio break. We'll set up the bio break so that you can go run SP BlitzIndex, take a look at the data, start reading some of the warnings, and then you can paste your questions in over in the Slack before we come back. We'll do our last bio break now, and then tackle the last set of scripts. SP Blitz Who, SP Blitz Lock. I think that's it. All right, so we will take a 20-minute bio break on this one, just since it's, we did 20 last time. We'll do a 15-minute bio break on this one, and we'll say Google, 15-minute bio break. So 15-minute timer. We'll regroup in 15 minutes at 1:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. Chandra says, can you point me to a good article regarding auditing? Books Online, actually. Books Online is where I would start. So SQL Server, Books Online auditing. It's really funny. It sounds terrible for me to say. And it's so funny that it did, like, all of the non-Microsoft comes up. Site Microsoft.com. Write edits. Oh, getting started. That's not. Oh, that's a book. Who wants to read books? Oh, yeah, perfect. Auditing. There you go. So I'm going to copy paste this in just in terms of the link. So it sounds really goofy for me to say, hey, you should go read Books Online. But here's the thing. And I'll leave the clock running and I'll just go after this. Here's the thing. If a feature was added in the last 5 to 7 years, the documentation is pretty good. If the feature was added before that, the documentation is not so good. Microsoft got really good with the documentation over the last few years. I'm constantly amazed by how much work they put into the document. Now, it's a little wordy. It's not exciting to read. It's not fun. They don't make pet store jokes. But they go into exhaustive detail in a lot of stuff. Where it kind of falls down flat is like if you look up the contents of a DMV, like what does user_updates mean? And it'll say the number of updates done by a user. I'm like, oh, thanks, golf clap. But for general concept stuff, like how do I do auditing, Books Online is actually great. It's not bad at all.